Plastic has been found just about everywhere on Earth, including the deepest trenches in the oceans, the highest mountain, and even in our own bodies. Yes, inside of us. There are many stakeholders involved in addressing the plastic crisis, and the one thing they all agree on is that this problem must be solved. To help us learn about the complexity of the issue, the need for a multifaceted solutions, and the role everyone has to play in addressing this problem, we'll turn to Sarah Bennett, Penn Future's campaign manager for clean water advocacy in the Lake Erie watershed. Hello and welcome to a special digital program, a joint effort between the Jefferson Educational Society and Penn Future. I'm Ben Spigot, I'm the vice president at the JES, and I'm a contributing editor at the Erie Reader. Before we get to her presentation, a bit about the presenter. Ms. Sarah Bennett, who we'll hear from, is Penn Future's campaign manager for clean water advocacy in the Lake Erie watershed. She earned her bachelor's and master's degrees in zoology at Michigan State University. After earning those degrees, she spent 13 years teaching biology at the college level. She served as the chairperson of the biology department and co-director of the environmental science program at Mercyhurst University for 2 years, was also their sustainability officer for 2 years. She's a member of the Northwest Pennsylvania chapter of Sigma Chi and the university representative, was the university representative on Keep Erie County Beautiful Advisory Committee. She's organized many litter and dump site cleanups in the area. Folks, before turning things over to Ms. Bennett, who will present and share her insight, her knowledge, and expertise around this issue, plastics, the global crisis, a few programmatic notes. Since this program is first airing live on the JES Facebook page, we're going to work our way through as many questions from you, the viewers, as we can as we host this event. If you have a question, just leave it in the comments section below. If you're watching or listening to a later broadcast of this event, still send us your questions, your comments to keep this conversation going. And of course, for more information about upcoming JES programs and publications, visit our website, jeserie.org, and be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, for more information about Penn Future, head over to their website, pennfuture.org, and also find them on the social platforms. Now, to get us started, I'd like to turn things over to Miss Sarah Bennett. Sarah, thank you for coming back again and to have this conversation and to take a look at the global plastics crisis, causes, consequences, and solutions. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. So I'll be talking about the plastics crisis, causes, consequences, and solutions. Ben's already given me a nice introduction. And so we'll get started. So I do want to just place this in the context of the rest of the presentations that I've done with the Jefferson. Last December, Penn Future published Our Water, Our Future, a common agenda for protecting Pennsylvania's Lake Erie watershed. We published this with 13 regional organizations, regional to Northwest Pennsylvania. We also had a technical advisory committee that was comprised of 4 additional organizations and regional scientists. And this document has been distributed to all municipal government officials in the Lake Erie watershed of Pennsylvania. The point to this was to identify threats to water quality in the Lake Erie region and identify solutions with a specific goal of policy solutions, because policy solutions are going to cause the long-term changes and protections that we need for water that is such an important part of our life here in Erie, Pennsylvania, and surrounding areas. And plastic was among the major threats to water quality in the region. And you know, if you're from the area, and really this is not different than other places on the water, but you see plastic everywhere. We see plastic litter on our streets. We see them, you know, it comes into our yards, and we see it in the water as well. And so we know that this is a problem, but what I'm going to do today is place it into the global context and really kind of show how complicated this issue is, and that we need complicated solutions as well. So just to get us started, and I think unfortunately everyone probably understands the scope of this plastic crisis, but just to give us visuals of what this looks like, I wanted to show photos from around the globe that show this plastic crisis. And so on the left here, you see an image of a woman in oh, I'm blanking on where this image was. I think it's Thailand, standing amongst all of this trash, most of which is plastic. On the right, we see an image taken by Carolyn Power. She's a photographer in the Caribbean. And so this was an image that she took from underneath a pile, a huge mass of trash that was in the Caribbean. And then the center picture, this is a photo of Marcus Erickson, who's one of the executive directors of Five Gyres Institute. This is him. This trash is trash that I picked up with Mercyhurst University students with Marcus in April of 2018, I think it was, when he came for Earth Day. And his big thing in Five Gyres really focuses on looking at the brands of the materials that they collect, because corporate responsibility is one of the solutions. So I wanted to show this global aspect, but also this is a local issue too. So this is a huge problem, but it's also a tiny problem. And so what we see in these images here on the left are plastic pellets that have escaped in Erie, Pennsylvania, from a rail car, bringing those plastic pellets into our region. In the center here, we see microplastics that were pulled from water. And on the right, we see microfibers. These are plastics from our laundry that comes from all of the plastic, the polyester clothing that we use, and it comes out and drains from every load of laundry that we have. And these fibers were found in the Great Lakes. So this, and I'm not going to stop here. This problem is much bigger than even that. So we have plastic at the highest parts, the highest locations on the globe, but we also have them in the deepest areas of our globe. So a plastic bag was found at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. But it goes beyond that. It's not just about finding macroplastics, these littered items. These plastics are finding their way into our wildlife. So this is deep sea amphipods. So some of the deepest parts of the ocean were found to have microplastics inside of them. And then we have also recently found plastic in human placentas, microplastics in human placentas. So plastic is literally everywhere. So listeners might have seen the scope of this problem, but I wanted to just make sure that we started with that so that everyone understood plastic is literally everywhere. So I'm going to talk about the causes, the consequences, and then solutions for the rest of today's talk. Among the causes of this plastic issue include our human ingenuity. Technology and development have allowed us to make lots of new plastics. Plastic is incredibly malleable. We can make almost anything out of plastic at this point. It's lightweight, and that's been really helpful. It's durable, it's malleable, and this table on the right really just shows the different types of plastic. And notice we have this number 7 category, other, that has lots of other plastics. And I'll point out that PLA, which is a plant-based plastic, is included in that other category too. And and we have an ever expanding number of different types of different things we can do with plastic. One of the things I want to talk about, and I'll come back to this too, is that plastic is incredibly cheap to produce. I have an asterisk there though, because plastic is kind of like incorrectly low. I know there's a word that I'm trying to use here and my brain isn't catching on to that, but it should not be as low as it is, because the cost to produce plastic and plastic goods is not, does not take into account all of the costs of producing this plastic, from environmental impacts, human health impacts, but also actual physical costs to produce plastic. Earlier this year, Penn Future published a report on fossil fuel subsidies just in Pennsylvania. And in Pennsylvania alone, fossil fuels are subsidized at $3.8 billion a year. And so that low cost is a cost that we're all paying with our tax dollars too. So we're subsidizing fossil fuels, and fossil fuels is where the vast majority of plastic is produced. But we also have some societal issues going on here too. And this really started right all the way back when plastic, first kind of came on the market, when we started using plastic widely. So we have this throwaway mindset. And this image here, you may have seen it before, but this is from Life magazine in 1955. It is people literally throwing plastic into the air. And I've had conversations, it might have even been with you, Ben, about people who have said that plastic, they did just leave plastic after a picnic, and it was just there, and you left it because that's you thought that was okay to do. But we still have this throwaway mindset. It just looks a little bit different now. So it's not societally, socially acceptable to just leave our trash outside. Some people still do, but we have this throwaway mindset that everything we buy is a temporary thing. You buy a $500 cell phone, for example, or maybe you spend more than that, and you're only going to have it for just a few years. That's a throwaway mindset. When you buy a TV, you don't expect it to last more than 5 years at this point. And in some cases, that's actually that those products are engineered to not last very long. So that is planned obsolescence is the name for that. In addition to this, though, our society has changed. So research has shown that most households in the United States are now dual income households. So you have both partners. If it's a two-partner household, you have both partners working. But at the same time, parents are trying to spend more time with their kids. And we also have more things than, I have graphs showing these things, but I didn't want to bore everyone with graphs, so I didn't put them all here. But this is well supported with research. And so if you are a dual income household, you have two parents who are working, but also trying to spend more time with their kids, that requires something has to give. And so we have these lives, we require basically convenience. We require convenience in our food. We require convenience in our cleaning. Think about, the wipes you can buy and just toss them. Those come in a plastic container. So society has changed as well to kind of demand convenience. But also our society has grown, our population is larger, and with more people, you produce more trash. That's just a given. Now, over here on the right, there's a graph showing from 1960 to 2018 how trash has increased. You'll see that it did have a little bit of a dip, but more recently it's also starting to go up. But we do see a general trend of increased trash. Now, one thing I want to point out with this graph is that most of our trash is landfilled. That's this light gray portion. The second most common solution to our trash is recycling. And then we have combustion with energy recovery. So trash to energy, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And then yellow is composting. So we're trying to see that a little bit too. We've also in this same time period seen a 20-fold increase in plastic production. So that's what this image on the left is showing, is a 20-fold increase in this plastic production, with most of that being plastic packaging. Okay, so most of what I've said so far is really focused on the United States. But I do want to make sure that we talk about other nations, because they play a significant role, especially in the plastic that we're finding in oceans. So what we see in developing nations is poorly developed waste infrastructure. So in the United States, if you our landfills that exist now, basically since the 1980s, are sanitary landfills, and they're engineered, they have liners, and they have a whole system of pipes and things to try to keep as much leachate from escaping into the environment as possible. Developing nation, those are really, really expensive. I want to say when visiting the Lakeview landfill in Erie, it was something like $400,000 per like square foot of this liner. It's ridiculously expensive. And so developing nations don't have the resources for this. So they often have more what's called an open landfill, and that's what we see in the picture on the right here. This is an open landfill or dump in Thailand, where it's just a place where trash is left, and it's not engineered in any way. Often, in some countries, people will live in these places, unfortunately. Other images you might see if you do a quick image search of open landfills online, you'll see burning of these landfills, often on purpose to reduce the volume of those landfills. But at the same time, these nations are developing, and they have citizens who are they're changing, right? So they're starting to see a lot of the things that the United States has seen in the past. So their demand for plastic is increasing. But they also import waste from developed nations like the United States. So in about 2017, this kind of became well known to the public that China decided they were not going to take our recyclables anymore. That was, I think, the first time that a lot of the US public understood that a lot of our recyclables were heading overseas. And so, but China wasn't the only place. It was kind of the biggest place, but it wasn't the only place we were sending our waste. So we send, I said, that these nations are contributing significantly to the ocean trash, but I think it's really important to understand that a lot of that trash that they are releasing into the ocean is our trash. And so sometimes I've seen people say things like, why are we so worried about this in the United States if those other countries are the ones dumping their trash in the ocean? And the reason is it's not just their trash. It's a lot of our trash too. Okay, so those are kind of the major causes. And, I'm trying to fit a major problem here into 45 minutes of a 45-minute talk. So there definitely are things that I did not cover, I won't cover today. But I want to get into what are the consequences here. So, you might see a plastic bottle floating in the water. What's the big deal, right? It's just plastic. I think we tend to think of plastic as this kind of inert and sterile material, and that couldn't be further from the truth. And so the real problems come when you understand what's going on with plastic once it gets into the environment, and even before that. And so the consequences here really start at the beginning of plastic's life cycle. So there is environmental damage caused by plastics right from the beginning. So I said before that plastic the vast majority of plastic is produced from fossil fuels. So extraction and refining of natural gas and oil, which are the fossil fuels used to produce plastic, have environmental issues or cause environmental damage. They destroy ecosystems. They release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and really damage the entire area around them and contribute to climate change. Then that natural gas and oil has to be refined. So it's refined, in the case of plastic, it's refined and made into pre-production plastic pellets. So I'm going to refer to this table here on the right. That is a list of contaminants from a list of air contaminants that are projected to come from the Shell cracker plant in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. This is from the Pennsylvania Bulletin, so this isn't made up information. And so we see nitrogen oxides and carbon monoxide, particulate matter, both large and fine, sulfur oxides, volatile organic compounds or VOCs. That's a whole host of air pollutants, some of which are carcinogenic. Additionally, we have hazardous air pollutants, ammonia, and carbon dioxide. And we have these toxic air pollutants that are coming from this. We also, a lot of these pollutants contribute to smog, which causes issues with respiratory health. But this carbon dioxide equivalent, this is in tons per year. So 2.2 tons per year of carbon dioxide in a time when we've just heard, we've just had the IPCC release their latest climate numbers, kind of sounding alarms that we have 4 years left to dramatically reduce our carbon dioxide. So this cracker plant is producing plastic pellets. Those plastic pellets then will go to different companies and they'll be melted down. There are some air pollutants that come with that as well. When we get these products, I mentioned fibers in our laundry. Those, it's not right now. There's unless you don't buy those certain products, there's not a lot you can do. There are engineering filters that you can put into your washing machines, but those are not widely available, and I have no idea how expensive they're going to be. So now that we have products made from plastic, they're getting into the environment in a lot of different ways. There's accidental and purposeful littering. There's this, if you just drive through the city of Erie or any of the surrounding townships or municipalities, you'll see trash that has escaped just from trash pickup and recycling pickup. And then the problem with those is eventually they get into our waterways and they break down into the tiny microplastics that I showed you. And then waste management is what I was talking about as far as plastic escaping. So the point here, and I've been a little bit long-winded, is that the entire life cycle of plastic has negative impacts on the environment. And I also want to be sure that I point out the picture on the top right here. This is a fracking fluid waste pond. And so a lot of plastic, an increasing amount of plastic is coming from fracking fluid, or coming from fracked gas. And fracking fluid is a part of that has some pretty toxic chemicals. So again, we can say, so what? So it's getting into the environment and it's breaking down, and so we have plastic in the environment. What's the problem? The problem is it's not this inert, sterile material that we think it to be. There are, I say potential here because this is really where research, we're kind of butted up against the extent of the research that that has been done. There have been laboratory studies and field studies that show the impacts of plastic and plastic additives on the health of wildlife. For example, one organism that people really like to study are Daphnia. It's also called a water flea. They're little tiny zooplankton. We have plenty of them in our lake, in our streams. There have been many studies looking at Daphnia, and they've found things from acute toxicity that results in death of these Daphnia to developmental issues and hormonal issues as well. The problem with that is, again, people often say, well, okay, so it's a tiny little organism living in the water. So what? Well, there are tons of small fish that eat these Daphnia. And so what happens is these impacts are felt throughout a food web. And because of the nature of many of the chemicals that are added to plastic, those can bioaccumulate and become a bigger problem and biomagnify and become a bigger problem throughout the ecosystem. So I mentioned these additives. There was a recent study that examined the different chemical additives that are added to plastic. They found over 10,000 additives added to plastic, and at least 2,400 of those were of potential concern. And they were of potential concern because they persist in the environment, meaning they stick around for a long time. So those types of things, things like PCBs, for example, even if you ban them, they stick around for a very long time and they continue to have negative impacts. They're also of potential concern because of bioaccumulation. They accumulate in the tissue of living organisms, or are of potential concern due to toxicity. And they found that many of these additives have not been well studied, and they definitely have not been studied as far as interactions between the chemicals too. So this gets very complicated. And you know, we're like really into the deep. These are the problems here, and it starts to make you feel really depressed, I think, and scared. So we will get to solutions eventually. But I also wanted to point out this image that's on the right. And this is from a report by the Center for Center for International Environmental Law. They did a report called "Plastic and Health: The Hidden Cost of a Plastic Planet." I would highly recommend, this is freely available online. I would highly recommend this as additional reading for those of you who are interested in learning more. This image on the right is from that report, and shows, based on, it's research based and their sources are in the report too, shows all the potential human health impacts of plastic throughout its life cycle. But I wanted to be sure to point out that this problem is not just a health problem and not just an environmental problem. It's an economic problem too. So this is a report from Keep Pennsylvania Beautiful that was published in 2020. And I've highlighted Erie's costs here in red. This is what Erie spent, the city of Erie spent on prevention, education and outreach, abatement, and enforcement over a 5-year period of litter and illegal dumping. And so things like prevention include like trash and recycling bin publicly available. Illegal dumping, the prevention there are the big hazardous waste pickup days that you can take your paint or your TVs and have those recycled properly. So over a 5-year period, the city of Erie spent over $2.2 million addressing this issue of dealing with stuff. And I know this is beyond plastic, but plastic makes a significant proportion of this. And if we look at just these 9 cities that are included in this study, over a 5-year period, they spent over $38.5 million in Pennsylvania alone. So imagine that on the bigger scale, looking at the entire United States or the entire world. So this is an economic problem too. Okay, so now we get to the good news. There are solutions here. And I'm going to talk about solutions. I'm going to start with talking about solutions that individuals can do. And then I'm going to look at policy solutions, because remember, policy is the important part here, because policy is going to cause the long-term solutions that we're looking for. So as an individual, the biggest thing you can do, and this is actually better news. You know, if I was talking about climate change, individuals have things they can do and should do, but they're not going to, those aren't as impactful. In the case of plastic, because it's a consumer good that we purchase, we have a pretty strong power here. And so really what you need to do here is use your power as a consumer by voting with your wallet. And what you can do here is choose plastic alternatives and avoid convenience items as much as you can. So if a significant proportion of the United States stopped buying bottled water, for example. That would send a pretty strong message to people who are bottling water and producing those plastic bottles that this isn't as profitable anymore, and that would reduce the production of that bottled water. Choose reusable and non-plastic items anytime you can, and support a reuse economy. So I'm thinking, I don't like using examples here because I'm sure every example I can give you has its own environmental bad story, right? So the bad thing about what we do. But so reuse economy, for example, I'm going to use this idea of a soda stream. And this is a bad example because you don't need a soda stream, but just go with me here. If you purchase a soda stream, it comes with a CO2 canister. The reuse part of that is that you can take your CO2 canister to Kohl's to have it refilled instead of buying a totally new canister. And so if the more you purchase things like that, again, the more you're sending the message, that's what consumers want. And so that's the direction that the market will go. So vote with your wallet, use your power as a consumer to drive change here. And there's lots of examples of this working well. Also in Erie, you can join an environmental organization and help them create campaigns to get people to reduce their plastic use. I would love to see more environmental participation in environmental organizations in Erie and surrounding areas. And then also, if you've watched any of my programs with the Jefferson before, this is a big thing that Penn Future does and encourages and can train you to do, is to talk to your state and federal legislators about the need for policy solutions that reduce plastic in the environment. All right, so those are some individual choices. As far as policy solutions go, one thing I want to point out, I'm going to go back just a minute. Notice up here, I have reduce, reuse. And here I still have reduce, reuse. You've probably heard of the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce and reuse are the ones you should do first. They're listed first for a reason, because those are the ones that are going to have the biggest impact on the environment, the biggest positive impact. Reduce and reuse. We'll talk about recycling in just a minute. Recycling is our go-to, right? Because it's easy to toss things in, but recycling doesn't have as big of an impact as reducing and reusing. So policies that are going to help create this long-term reduction in plastic pollution and these problems that come with it include regulating plastic pellets, flakes, and dust. We're starting to see this in other states. Pennsylvania doesn't have strong regulations here. I don't think any regulations here other than stormwater. But I think Maryland, for example, is considering or has recently passed regulations regulating plastic pellets, flakes, and dust. And this basically says holds companies and transportation companies accountable for keeping these plastics out of the environment. We want to say things like extended corporate responsibility for the life of the products. In Maine, for example, they just passed an extended corporate responsibility bill that requires companies to help pay for recycling. And that's an important thing. So it's taking the onus off of individuals and putting it on the companies who are responsible for producing these products. Stop subsidizing fossil fuel extraction and new petrochemical plants. This is a big issue in Pennsylvania. Take those subsidies, and if we're going to subsidize, shift them to renewable products and renewable technologies and research and development for those types of things. Increase refill and reuse solutions. Eliminate preemption. This is a big one going on right now in Pennsylvania. The city of Philadelphia is suing the state of Pennsylvania because they have a preemption law that prevents local communities from implementing bag bans, for example, plastic bag bans. Interestingly, though, after that lawsuit was filed, that preemption was kind of allowed to expire. So we're watching to see what happens with that lawsuit. But basically, get rid of this preemption so that local communities that are spending significant amounts of money dealing with this problem can address that problem in ways that they see will be helpful. And then also we need to ultimately eliminate single-use and unnecessary plastics. Okay, so we've talked about individual solutions, we've talked about corporate solutions. I do want to talk about recycling and chemical recycling for a little bit, because like I said, our go-to is recycling, and I'm sure we're all feeling the issue. You know, the last couple of years, we know that recycling is broken. But there's also a major push, especially from the plastic industry, that for more recycling, and recycling is going to save us. I think it's important to know that we've had recycling available, and it has become increasingly accessible since the 1970s. And in all of that time, despite the increased availability of recycling, only about 9 to 10% of all plastic that was ever produced has actually been recycled. And so there is a lot of skepticism in the environmental arena that recycling is the solution to our plastic problem. It might be part of the solution, but we also have to take a look at the realities of recycling. Contamination is a major problem. Contamination of food and other things that get into the plastic. The other thing I'll point out is, you know, if you take a look at this, looks like a netting, a bunch of water bottles in netting. A bottle of water or soda has like 3 different plastics in it, and that makes it really difficult to recycle. The other thing is, remember I said plastic is malleable. We put these additives in plastic to make it do what we want. That's the beauty of plastic, right? We can make anything out of plastic because of these additives. And so the problem is, once those additives are there, they're there. You can't do anything about them. And so that makes recycled plastic a lot more of a hassle to deal with. So it's a lot easier to just make whatever you want to make out of virgin plastic, which is ridiculously cheap because of all the subsidies that we provide to these fossil fuel companies. And so it's actually cheaper to produce new plastic than it is to use recycled plastic and make new recycled content. There's other issues here. So recycling is also energetically expensive, though it does have an energy savings compared to new plastic. So that's a good thing about recycling, which is why we can say it can be part of the solution here. But the last thing I'll say is, because of all of those additives, plastic is generally downcycled. It cannot be recycled infinitely into new. You're not going to recycle a bottle of water into a bottle of water because of those additives, and it's just really difficult to deal with. So that's recycling. And then the last thing I'll mention about on the topic of recycling is, you may have started to hear about chemical recycling. Chemical recycling is basically taking plastic and using chemical processes to break it down into its parts, and then use that to either make fuel or make new plastic, or potentially something else that can come from that. So kind of taking plastic and making it back into oil as just an example. The problem with chemical recycling is that it's, we're seeing articles published about it, and you're seeing these big companies pop up, but it hasn't been proven on a large scale. There still is not a solution to the toxic additives that have been added here. So what happens to those? What about, it requires a significant amount of energy. So if you did do it at scale, what does that energy look like, and how many greenhouse gases are we producing here? And then finally, what are the environmental impacts of high energy, high temperatures, taking that plastic and breaking it down? So what types of air pollutants, for example, are produced from that? How much water does this use? So chemical recycling is one of those big question marks right now. It's being touted all over the place, but really hasn't been proven on a broad scale. And then the last thing I'm going to mention is, and I flat out call these non-solutions. That's going to be an unpopular opinion in some places. The issue here, so anytime you're going to burn plastic, that's a non-solution. Again, we have those toxins. We don't know what happens to them. So plastic incineration, for example, and that can happen in a lot of different ways, and waste to energy facilities are expected to increase. There are big problems with this because they rely on state-of-the-art technology. So they'll say, oh, the emissions, the harmful emissions are low as long as you're using state-of-the-art technology. Well, we've seen a lot of other industries that emit, that have harmful emissions, and they don't have state-of-the-art technology. And in fact, we have to fight those companies. We saw that in Erie with Erie Coke. For decades, they had illegal emissions. They did not have state-of-the-art emissions technology. So we have to be really careful when we're burning things like this. The other thing is all of those additives, over 10,000 chemicals that are added to plastics, 2,400 of which are of potential concern. What happens to those when they're burned? What chemicals are produced there? And what happens to them? Are they going into the air? We only test for a handful of chemicals in emissions, the major ones. That's based on old air standards, right? And anytime we want to increase those air standards, it's a fight. And so what happens to all of those? What happens to the toxic ash at the end of that incineration process? What happens to the water that's used in these state-of-the-art emissions equipment? Because they use water to pull those chemicals, the toxins, out of the air. So there's lots of big questions and the potential for great harm here with incinerating plastic. And the last thing I'll mention is that these waste to energy facilities or incineration facilities are almost always located in environmental justice areas where you have people of low income and a high percentage of individuals who are Black or brown. And so we have disproportionate impacts here with these facilities too. And so that's why I call these, burning plastic is not a solution. That's not a path we want to go down as a society as we're trying to deal with plastic. So with all of that, the big thing here is we have to reduce plastic. There's a volume problem here. No matter what other solution, if we're talking about recycling or chemical recycling, no matter what other solution we have a volume problem. And that's the #1 problem with plastic. And if we don't reduce that volume, any of these other efforts are going to be in vain. So I leave you with this, I love this quote over here. I think it's pretty profound. I'm not going to read it to you, but it's basically the effort to clean a reusable spoon is considered to be more than all of the steps that it takes to produce a plastic spoon that we're just going to use once and throw away. So reduce. If you can take one thing home, I would say reduce. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Ms. Sarah Bennett, I want to thank you for that. And that's, I think, a hallmark we always ask here is what can the average person take away? And you hit it there at the end, reduce. How do we, and then also I think about the complexity of this issue. I think that's something that perhaps many of us hadn't thought of in terms of framing it that way, of the efforts that it takes to create a plastic spoon that we can then conveniently toss away, not thinking about all of the work that goes into that. What a complex and heavy issue. And I want to dive into some of the questions, but I have to commend you. And I suppose this will be a light note I'll sneak in. I'll commend you for the fact that we got through a 40-plus-minute presentation and yet no reference to the 1967 classic, The Graduate, with one word: plastics. And so I say that jokingly, but I want to bring it back to a point you mentioned earlier with the Throwaway Society. And I think that in preparing for this program, I'm thinking that we talked about a scene that has been burned into my mind, that's from the hit series Mad Men, in which the family just shakes out their picnic blanket and leaves all of the garbage behind, gets in their car and takes off. And I thought how absurd and ludicrous to do that. And sitting next to me is my mom, who said, we did that as kids, and she affirmed that. And so a two-part question here to sort of get the context for this is, when did we wake up to this? If we were looking at in 1967, The Graduate, plastics being a big future, and this is where our energy would be spent. And if we had the Throwaway Society before that in the 50s, when did we wake up to this of, oh my gosh, we have a real problem that has gone ignored, and now we're working to solve it in creative ways? When did we become aware of that? And part two of the question I'd ask is, where are we on the timeline in terms of reaching that critical tipping point of there is no going back, or have we already gotten past that? Can we stop it now? How far away from it are we if it's in the future, and how far away from it are we in the past? So when did we wake up to this, and where are we in the timeline of, we've really got to do something to address this global crisis?
Yeah, I'd say that we woke up to this probably in the 1970s with, so much other awakening of environmental issues. But that's when you really saw recycling kind of getting on the kind of recycling was produced. And then having trouble with my words today. But the other thing, people were just becoming, you had the Cuyahoga River caught on fire. And that's when, in the 1970s, was when the Clean Water Act was passed, and so many other kind of groundbreaking environmental laws were passed in the 1970s. So I think that's when we became aware. I think there's been renewed awareness because the turtle with the straw in its nose was like this iconic moment for people. And I think with our globalization and our global economy, just this massive production of plastic and plastic all over the globe, you've seen a pretty huge increase in plastic on beaches, on previously pristine places. And that, and you're seeing these really major images online it's raised awareness, and people are angry about this and they're concerned. And so I think that is reason for hope. But to think about where we are on the timeline, I've seen 2050. Maybe that's just a convenient year. But there was one study done that kind of extrapolated the rate of plastic pollution and the plastic pollution that exists in our oceans. By 2050, they said we'd have more microplastic in the ocean than fish. And that's the thing. We cannot have that. But there is so much energy now around kind of anti-plastic, but also like, let's come up with solutions. And we're seeing legislative solutions kind of pop up all over the country too, and across the globe, really. Canada just declared plastic as a toxic chemical. And so we're seeing these types of things. And so I think there's great reason for hope.
And speaking of the solutions, pulling from something in the comments section right now, folks heard you mention plant-based plastics, and I think that fell under number 7. That's one of the things I think we wrestle with too, is the numbers of plastic, and then understanding recycling those numbers as we're trying to do something with them. And I'll get to that in a second. But looking at plant-based plastics, is this a good future, this person's asking, of a way to have plastic but have it more responsibly?
Right now, it's not a great option. And that hurts my heart too. In my last presentation, we talked about, oh, plants can save everything, right? The problem is that in order to make even plant-based plastic do what we want it to do, it requires the additives too. And so the problem is that, and there have been studies that look at the toxicity of plant-based plastic compared to traditional plastic, and it's about the same, unfortunately. So, you know, is there hope for plant-based plastics in the future? Sure, there's tons of really cool research going on, but I think that gets more at, we're looking for a simple solution, and that gets more at it. This is a complicated problem. It's a major problem. We need to reduce our plastic use, regardless of where that plastic is coming from.
Well, and I can't help but think of the idea of, yeah, we want the silver bullet solution and we want something that's easy. And to me, what seems to be easy is single stream recycling. Put it all in one bag, put it on the curb, and it goes away. And we think we've done our part. And I think that's maybe what the person is asking of the plant-based plastic. Can I feel good about this when I buy this?
Oh.
Can I feel better about this than traditional plastics? We know we're not there yet. But looking at the single stream recycling, I want you to touch a little bit more on the challenges we run into that there, because we even talked about contamination issues. And I'll admit, I love peanut butter. I'll admit I don't love cleaning out peanut butter jars because I worry about the fact that, is it clean enough to be recycled at this point? Then I also think about the amount of energy that I'm putting into cleaning it, the water that I'm using, the chemicals I'm using to scrub it out, to hopefully hope that this one piece of plastic is going to be recycled. So talk to us about the challenges of contamination. And I think particularly when it comes to single stream recycling, we just put everything into one bag and away it goes.
Yeah. So first, I want to say that plant-based plastic, if you have a plastic that says PLA, it can't go in your recycling bin. It can't be recycled. It's that number 7. It can't. So, but as far as single stream, so recycling is so complicated. So we had, you know, when recycling started, people who cared enough, they would collect their recyclables and it would be separate, and you maybe took it to a place and deposited it. And that kept a much cleaner stream than we have right now. But there wasn't a lot of participation. And so we went to this single stream, which made an increase in curbside recycling. Just, you know, it was so easy and it's so accessible that you had major increases in participation for that single stream recycling. But it's too easy, really, because you can just toss everything in there, and it's called wishful recycling. So, well, I think I can recycle this. I'm going to toss it in, and whoever is in charge of that is going to take care of that. And so with single stream recycling, contamination is a major problem. And so you have places now, I think maybe it was Toronto. It was one city in Canada that I researched that had gone back to separate stream. If you bring that up around here, though, they'll say that would be ridiculously expensive because you'd have to change your bins, you'd have to change the trucks. I mean, there are not a lot of easy solutions to the recycling problem, and contamination is a major, major problem.
And it seems like cost is a barrier to that, or at least the sticker shock of having to do something that's going to be a significant pivot from how we currently do it. But, you know, at the same time, looking how we're currently doing it isn't working up to the fullest potential. I think an alarming number that stood out in your presentation here is thinking about it, that only 9 to 10% of all plastic ever created has actually been recycled, which means on the back end of that, you know, 90 to 91% of something that is intended to be recyclable isn't. And recycling tends to be the R we favor the most at this point. And if we learn anything from you, it's reduce. You know, we want to start working on that path. That I can't get that number out of my head now, Sarah. That stuck with me. The idea that, you know, we're looking at potential single digits of all plastic created, and then to go back to your graph of just looking at what seems inevitably easy to understand, more of us, more things, more consumers, more things, more garbage, that's increasing. And as we increase, up goes that line in terms of what we're producing and making. And yet we're not, even the R we favor the most, we're not doing a great job at this.
Right.
And how do we get there in terms of, finding ways that can be palatable, in championing that recycling? Should local folks, champion to have a movement away from single stream if they're willing to pay for it, if they know the true cost? What are some things that we can look at? Because that number, I can't shake it.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of the things. Moving recycling to a more local level. So, for example, if we look at Erie County, the bigger municipalities have curbside recycling, but if you go further out, they don't have that option. They actually no longer even have drop-off options because it was prohibitively expensive and the contamination was awful. So yeah, there are some new things out there. Things like I've seen the concept of a MiniMRF, so a mini materials recovery facility that it would be maybe managed by the county or by a township or maybe even a nonprofit or something. And people could bring their materials to that location to be recycled. And then the other thing is creating kind of local markets for these things. So for example, in Erie, there is a company that produces insulation for homes and businesses out of recycled paper. And they specifically use recycled phone books. And so if that was more, if that could be created, and I'm not an economics person, I'm not a business person, so I don't know about how that would work, financially, but the more you can kind of do more local, the better.
Yeah, and I like that example of, being able to do something there. The phone book's a great one, and I think of, ways to incentivize users to embrace the other two R's while also more smartly and taking a look at how they're recycling. Back to the other two R's and reducing. One of the commenters in the comment section is noting the bag ban in Pennsylvania. Walk us through that again, because we've seen some states either outright ban them or pass the cost onto the consumer, de-incentivize using a plastic bag because now there's a cost associated to that. So again, where are we in that in Pennsylvania? In a follow-up to that, could that be something that we do as a local municipality to say, we just choose to ban this, that in Erie County, plastic bags are banned from grocery stores, or if you're going to use those, they cost 10 cents a piece, and that funding goes to creating better infrastructure for recycling in the county. So where do we stand? What can we do?
Yeah, so there's one small town that has passed a bag ban, and I'm blanking on its name. It's over on the east side. But Philadelphia has passed a bag ban. They have not implemented it yet, and they're still working out the details. Are they going to charge a fee or are they not? The fee is going to encourage that's going to have the biggest impact. That's going to force people and really kind of create this reinforcement to get people to bring their own bags, because if you're going to hit someone's checkbook, that's going to have a big impact on them. But the problem there is that when you implement a fee for bags, that could have disproportionate impacts on low income people. And so one of the things that I've seen to kind of work around that, first of all, I'll say that in a lot of low income neighborhoods in Philadelphia, from what I've heard, talking to people who are working on this in Philadelphia, is that a lot of those neighborhoods actually support this because they are tired of looking at plastic bags in their neighborhoods. So it might not be an issue, but you'd have to talk to the communities to check that, right? But the other thing I've seen, the other solution to that I've seen is that maybe in low income areas of a city that has a bag ban, you don't implement that bag ban, or you don't implement the fee. And so you kind of get rid of that disproportionate impact. Pittsburgh is, I think they're considering a bag ban at this point, but have not passed one. And that's it as far as I know. I'm sure that, I just today saw Reading is now kind of talking about banning plastic bags too.
And Reading in the news because it has leapfrogged Erie, Pennsylvania. Now it's the fourth largest city in the Keystone State. And also going back to your graph, it looked like they spent about $200,000 less than Erie, Pennsylvania did when it came to either preventively addressing or abating littering. And so again, this is an economic issue. This is a social justice issue. This is a complex issue. And I think there's a lot to take away. But one other thing I want to touch on before we're almost out of time here is that corporate responsibility. How can folks know to look for that in finding that? Because I'm not sure that it's out in front of us to know what corporations are doing with plastic, other than if we happen to see it somewhere. And the example I'll use is I was recently at Walmart to get my tires changed, and the employee had a vest on, and it said 9 plastic bottles recycled made this vest. And I thought that's really interesting branding and logo that I wouldn't have thought of, and I didn't know about Walmart, that I might not have thought about that before. How can we know where to look? And taking a look at environmental impact statements or pledges from corporations, because a consumer economy, we vote with our wallet. And if we have the ability to vote with our wallet, how do we know where to look to find out who's doing it better, who's doing it right?
Yeah. So I guess I would, as far as corporate responsibility, I think that it's good that companies are starting to think about this, but you have to be really careful with companies because we have a term, greenwashing. They might make a bigger deal out of what they're doing, and the impact might not actually be great. So as far as this extended corporate responsibility goes, that really should be a policy, so that the individual doesn't have to go searching for the companies that are doing the right thing. And are they really doing it, or are they just trying to have good PR here? This should be at the, largely at the state level. You need corporate responsibility as a policy requiring, if you're producing a plastic bottle, then it needs to be easily recyclable. You use one plastic with it, or you're responsible for recovering that plastic bottle. So that's really where we want to see more of. If you really want to look at who's doing the good stuff, then I would say it's probably better to find an organization who's following these things. Things like, so Five Gyres is my go-to. I really, really like Five Gyres out of California. And they will have lists of either the bad players or the good players. And that's where I would go, is find a trusted organization who's done the work for you, so that you don't, because it's exhausting and there's so much information. I always say I go down the plastic rabbit hole, and it is taking many hours of my life.
And there's a lot of it, and a lot more we could certainly talk about here. Parting words, the two that I'm keeping in mind, reduce and policy. And I'm not saying to reduce policy, but I'm saying I think on the individual level, we can work at our own reduction when it comes to the use of plastics. And then I think at community level, we want to look at advocating for smart policy to address this. Any other things that we should take away from this presentation, looking at the global plastics crisis, Miss Sarah Bennett?
Besides reduce, I really think, that is the number one thing. I'm going to say it over and over. You've said it, I've said it, I'm going to say it again, because that's not something we're good at, and it's not something that we're hearing. So reduce is the number one thing. So if anybody listening, you want to do something right now, go look at all the plastic in your house and think about ways you can replace that plastic with things that can be reused.
Miss Sarah Bennett, Penn Future's campaign manager for clean water. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, talking about a tough, complex issue, to unpack that, taking the time, energy, and effort to share your insights with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And Sarah, for folks looking to access what you mentioned earlier, Our Water, Our Futures, a common agenda for protecting Pennsylvania's Lake Erie watershed, and to learn more about Penn Future, where do we point them? They can go to pennfuture.org.
Or they can email me at Bennet, 2 N's, 2 T's, at pennfuture.org.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. And of course, thanks to all of you tuning in, watching along at home, whether you're watching in real time live with us or catching a later broadcast of this, streaming it on demand. Thank you. Without you, these conversations and the exchange of ideas and information would not be possible. Friendly reminder to stream other JES digital programs on demand. Head over to our website, jeserie.org. There you're also going to find about details about upcoming programs, as well as a whole wide range of publications, from quick, timely reads to reports, essays, and more, all available free to download. And of course, be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For the Jefferson Educational Society, I'm Ben Speg, and be safe, be sound, and thanks for listening and learning with us.